lifted feet first in the air and given a hefty slap on the backside, which gave no indication whatsoever at that point of time of the size it would eventually attain due to long hours of sitting on the toilet seat. These critics, however, would hardly welcome such a beginning, for a straight line in literature, as in morals, rarely achieves significant results, and in our case here would certainly constitute nothing but a waste of time for the reader and the writer alike. So he's explicitly stating his intention with Zot and with, like, not cherry picking, but like choosing to only write about snippets of her life because it would be a waste. He's saying that, like, he's literally saying that his intention of writing such a disjointed story is to not waste the reader's time and to not waste his time because he wants to prove something with his character.
Which is really ironic that I feel like he wouldn't waste time, because in a lot of these passages I feel like he goes on really long descriptions of really unimportant stuff. But like, why the heck are we reading this section? Like, I don't know, like the whole 5 reception rooms, I don't know, from chapter 13, that kind of went completely over my head. And they went into one reception room, and then they served them cookies and tea. They went into another reception room, and then they talked with someone else. And they went into another reception room, and they found the little child. Like, it just didn't make any sense. Like, what is the point of them going through these 5 things? Why do we have to detail it? So I just feel like it's ironic that he said he was going to get to the point, but then he doesn't.
Well, I agree with Sadie on that. I mean, you see like a lot of parts in the book where Ibrahim's just very vague and he doesn't give a lot of details or descriptions about what's going on, but then you have like really mundane tasks like Sadie was talking about where he goes in really in depth and gives a lot of detail, but it doesn't really add to the story. He's just kind of rambling on.
Going back to Sarah's thought earlier about the being biased and the credibility, I think being like, just because he's biased doesn't affect his credibility. Like, if the purpose of the book is to show the negative, or the bad things about Egypt, like, you can't call a text biased because that's its purpose. Like what do you want it to do? Like, if its purpose is to present a negative image of Egypt, like, you can't expect him to show all the good things of Egypt because that would completely ruin his intentions. Additionally, although this is a work of fiction and the characters were made for a biased point, like, that doesn't affect his credibility because in between the chapters he includes newspaper clippings that actually occurred. So his use of the newspaper clippings to justify his statements within the plot that's actually happening in Zot is very useful because, well, it's real events and it kind of just justifies his idea and his image is trying to portray to the reader.
We're talking a lot about how Ibrahim puts a lot of negative aspects in the Zot and like criticizes the government and Egypt. But do you guys see any evidence of Ibrahim actually putting positive aspects in the Zot? Like, are there any things that he includes that maybe suggest that like the Egyptian people aren't totally hopeless? Serious question.
I think one case where we can see that the Egyptian people are not completely hopeless is at page 195, where heir apparent finally starts talking. I think this is one example of something positive that's happened in Zot's life, and it's maybe overshadowed by the struggles that took him to get there, and then some of the issues with the schooling afterwards. I think that there are actually a lot of little happy things that happen, but generally we focus on the negative, so we kind of overlook them.
I think that's actually an interesting point itself, because this is one happy thing that happened, but if you put it in the context, she didn't want to have this child, and the child couldn't talk originally, so those are 2 pretty big negative events that led up to this one positive event. So that also brings up the question of, like, I don't really know how to phrase this, but like, when does the good outweigh the bad? Obviously, like, the bad is pretty bad. Thanks, guys.
I think kind of relating that question to what Jillian was saying is that I think part of the point of this is to make it so the good doesn't outweigh the bad, because that would somewhat degrade the purpose of the novel to some degree. So as long as there's more negative than positive, I guess Ibrahim is kind of getting his point across, but I don't think there'll ever be more good events than bad events. And but running out of time, but have some good events.
Relating to what Vaughn and Jillian said, I think that even though it's biased, I mean, we just can't completely disregard the text just because Ibrahim might have a bias, but like everyone has said, it is a work of fiction, so not everything is completely as it happened, so we might have to take everything with a grain of salt, and we can't really take it at face value because we don't know if things actually happen, if they're actually this bad, or if Ibrahim was just creating these stories to for his purpose.
I have a question. So talking about how the book's going to end, there hasn't really been a plot going up. Do you guys think the book is going to sort of have a plot in the climax and sort of end with a moral or anything sort of ending, or it's just going to fade off and continue how it's like?
Zod's gonna die.
I would not be surprised if you read and you're kind of bored, and I would honestly not be surprised if you just flip to the next page and you're like, what the hell is that?
What?
Her ending, and it ends with like her daughters being like.
Ooh.
Well, yeah, I don't think that's an ooh moment, but.
Do you think Zod is gonna?
I don't know, but like, what do you think? Like, should
Well, regardless of if Zod dies or not, I think it's gonna end on more of like a reflection. Because, I don't know, the whole thing has just been experiences, so I feel like it can't just like end with what it's been the whole time, because then it won't really feel like an ending.
I feel like that's what you expect, but then like Matt
Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
there's gonna be like, you're waiting for the big profound, like some like, and then it just ends and you're like, wait, what's this?
I think if you stick with the idea that Zod is like a metaphor of Egypt, if you just end with her dying, that would kind of suggest that Egypt is gonna die. So it would kind of be awkward. And I think just kind of the idea that it'll just drop off somewhere, that could possibly make sense, because it's like, it doesn't seem that a lot of Egyptians are actually taking action to make change, so it's kind of just gonna keep on happening.
And if Zod represents some aspect of Egyptian society, at this point in time, like, Egypt is still struggling, or especially like the time period that Zod will end in, so it'll probably end at least negatively in some way, because Zod, as like Egypt, is going to be struggling and still dealing with these problems, and we haven't seen a clear resolution either in the time period of Zod or even now. I think they're still kind of adjusting. It'll end negatively.
I think Sadie was saying, maybe, I don't know, answering my own question, that this book, did Mubarak gain power in 82? Yeah? 82?
Yeah.
Okay. This was published in 92. So there's only 10 years in between, so I don't think he's gonna make it surpass modern day. It's only 10 years into the 30-year regime, so I don't know, that's important to take into account when considering when it's gonna end.
This is kind of a different question that like I don't think we've ever talked about, but it just kind of sticks out to me like as I've read the book, especially it's always in the news clippings. I was just wondering if anyone knew what Ibrahim's purpose was for omitting pictures but still having a box and a caption, and how I thought maybe possibly it could be that pictures often distort like our stereotypes of like what people look like, or like distract from the text or something like that. But I was wondering if anyone else had any thoughts on why he chooses to omit the pictures, and how pictures can add or take away from the meaning of something. Oh, page 128 is like the, I mean, it's all, in every single news clipping section, I think there's one, but, yeah.
I think this could add to like the whole, this novel is fiction, and since these are like actual news clippings, right? So like if they had pictures it'd be more real, and it might be taken even more offensive to the government if he like had pictures as evidence.
The book's supposed to be taken as fiction, and if there were realistic photos in it, it'd be really problematic for him as a whole. Since people believe that this book's a fiction work and that it's not supposed to really represent how Egypt was at that time.
Actually, I have a question about why, if Ibrahim wouldn't include pictures because he thought it was too realistic and wouldn't really fit with the theme of fiction, then why would he have an entire chapter of just newspaper clippings after every prose chapter?
I have also a question about the news clippings. Are they real? Because there are no citations, and isn't that like illegal? Are they real? They are, right?
Yeah.
And he just doesn't cite them. Okay.
Yeah.
Fine.
I think that's the whole point, like, it's supposed to be fiction, so
Yeah.
even though it's kind of like this thing like, oh, we kind of all know it's not fiction, but I'm kind of like categorizing it as fiction so he doesn't get like in trouble. And then as Rutigliano brought up, we're actually surprised that he hadn't gotten in trouble because of it, because I mean, even though it's called fiction, I think anyone who would read it would realize that it's not intended to really be fiction. So I think, I mean, obviously we don't know for sure if these news like clippings are real, but they're, I mean, you have to assume that they are real, like that was his purpose. And I mean, I don't think he really cited them all. Like, I think that's just, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question really, but I mean, I think it's clear enough that they are real and he's using them to back up what's actually happening in Zot's life, like in prose sections. But then yeah, in terms of like the pictures thing, because he already is, I mean, by using the real newspaper clippings, he already is like portraying something that's actually happening even though it's supposed to be fiction. But then I think that the images, I think those would resonate more with people and affect people more than just words. So you're kind of just noveling those would be too realistic in a way. I'm not really sure though about that. That is kind of interesting.
Newspaper clipping section about how in each clipping there's one bolded word or phrase. And I'm assuming that Ibrahim added these, because I don't see why they would be bolded in the actual text that he draws from. But the words that he chooses to emphasize seem to be a little bit inconsistent. So I was wondering if anyone had an idea for what his intention was.
I think it's just highlighting like the subject of the newspaper clipping, so that it sticks out, and you know, and the reader just gets a sense of what the newspaper clipping is about. So even if in one clipping he's talking about the bar, but in another clipping he highlights like jet trains. So I think just goes to like the subject and what Ibrahim wants the purpose of that particular newspaper clipping to evoke in the reader.
I think also it kind of enables the lazy reader inside you, because you're reading the newspaper clippings, like your eye goes to the bolded word and then you kind of go to the next one, right? You're like, okay. So I think that's kind of ironic because there was this common theme of him elongating stories, making transmission a lot longer and more engaging and more capturing, so the person will listen to it and like read it or listen, like that's what Zot has to do with machines. But they end up not listening to her. And so I think it's just kind of funny that he like goes from long lyrical to like, all right, here's clippings, and make it even more simple. I'll bold a couple words so you don't have to read. So he's kind of, I think, poking fun at the reader as well as himself, like saying,